Welcome to all the faith processors in the room, and welcome to all of you that are out there listening to this podcast, Processing Your Faith. My name is Pastor Harry Jarrett. I'm the pastor here at Pleasant Valley Church of the Brethren in Weir's Cave, and this is Faith in Process Sunday School. It's a live podcast in a Sunday school setting here at the church on Sunday mornings starting at 9:30. And each week I have a guest with me. And this week we have Millard Driver, who is returning again, I think for the third time, at least officially, on the podcast, although we've been having these kind of conversations for a little bit over a year and just recently started doing them recorded on this podcast. So I'm glad that you made it back from your saga with the truck out in Wyoming, out in Kansas. Yeah. I just got your truck fixed and drove it back, and it's still giving you problems. So sorry about that. But we were talking about the pursuit of happiness, right? Which the truck was not so much. I don't know. You were probably practicing the virtues with that whole experience, right?
Well, I kind of think maybe I was.
I think that certainly gave you an opportunity. I've been a pastor for a lot of years, and one of the things that I always tell people is I'm really praying for patience. And I tell them, you better be careful with that, because the only way to learn patience is by experiencing things where you have to actually be patient, which are typically not very fun experiences. So be careful what you pray for. Maybe you've been praying too much for all these virtues, and now you have this truck that's a grace builder in your life. I don't know.
Oh, well,
you don't want to think about that, do you?
Perhaps. You talked about in the last sermon, you talked about developing spiritual muscle.
Yes, I did. Muscle memory, holy muscle memory.
Would you notice I picked up on that?
I did. You sort of transposed it, but close enough. Yeah. Everybody makes it their own, right?
Yeah.
I took that imagery, holy muscle memory.
Well, and it's going to bear on the conversation today.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree. I didn't make that connection, but I appreciate you making the connection. So why don't you go ahead and tell folks what you wanted to talk about, where it came from.
I will.
And then we'll kind of go from there.
So, this past week, I was listening to a podcast. It was called Pursuit. And it's a podcast done by Jeffrey Rosen, who is looking at the founding fathers and their, in essence, pursuit of virtue.
Right. And he's the president and the CEO of the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, right? Very smart guy.
Very smart guy. So Jefferson, in writing the Declaration of Independence in the second paragraph, wrote these lines: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, the pursuit of happiness was the part that kind of stuck out to me. Now, in general, I think today we think about happiness as a good, solid economic life, having things, have friends, all of that. That's what we conceive of as happiness. And I think a lot of people today, when they read those lines, they understand that notion that Jefferson put out about the pursuit of happiness to be that very thing. It's the pursuit of basically material goods.
Or perhaps a feeling as well.
Well, and a feeling. Yeah. Well, the feeling generated by the material success.
Right.
The feeling generated by material success. But actually, I've learned that what Jefferson and the founding fathers meant by the pursuit of happiness is actually the pursuit of the virtues. Imagine that.
Okay. For those of us who don't understand what virtues are, what?
Well, Here's an example. Benjamin Franklin made himself a list of virtues. Okay? And on that list, he included cleanliness, temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, tranquility, and chastity.
Yeah.
13 of them. He came up with 13 virtues that he set out to make a part of his life. He obviously had some difficulty with that,
As most of us.
as most of us do. That's exactly right. But from the perspective of the founding fathers, apparently pursuing those sorts of virtues
Right.
was the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
And it was interesting, they said some really interesting things relative to that. John Adams said this. He said, our Constitution is made for a moral and religious purpose and will not secure very well any other type of people. In other words, he was saying our Constitution is made for a virtuous people.
Yeah.
If the people are not virtuous, then we probably will not secure the desired end.
It's not going to work. Yeah.
It's not.
I found that very interesting.
Yeah.
And it was, Jeff was proposing that it was an experiment. And the only way for the experiment to prosper, I guess, to work, was that people would pursue virtues, or I kind of reframed it in terms that make a little bit more sense to me in this day and age of self-improvement, of improving ourselves to become a moral, ethical, good, behaving people. So it was less about feeling good, but more about being good. And that the immense amount of power that this Declaration of Independence offered us, the people, and then, of course, the immense amount of power that the Constitution and the institution of government afforded us as a people, that you really needed to have good, virtuous, ethical, moral folks wielding that power, or else it would end up kind of back where we were. Would an oppressive government system we're experiencing that time.
The experiment, not to get too political, the essence of the experiment was, could a people be governed by law as opposed to governed by a monarch? That is the essence of the experiment before us. To be a people that governs itself by the law requires obvious ethical / virtue constraints.
Was it that they would be governed by law, or was it, with kind of launching off of this preamble, this pre-statement, was it that they would be governed by life, liberty, and be virtuous, be good? And that all then trickles down into ethical people and society.
James Madison is the one who came up with what's generally called the Madisonian structural constraints. That's what we talk about when we talk about checks and balances.
The balance of power and things.
The balance of power, because in that day they were considerably influenced by the notion of original sin, that people, were tended to be bad.
Yeah.
And so constraints had to be put in place to see to it that power was dispersed over several entities and not allowed to concentrate in one entity because when power concentrates in one entity, it allows for lots of really ugly things to happen.
Yeah. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
That's kind of the idea.
Yeah.
And James Madison said basically the same kinds of things about the virtues. He said, only a well-instructed people can be a free people. And that is worth knowing. Now, let's make a crossover to where, this is Sunday school.
Yes, and I was going to say, why are we talking about
That's-
this in the Sunday school?
Here is why we're talking about this in Sunday school. The reason we're talking about it is that when I read this list of virtues that Franklin delineated, now understand, Franklin got his list of virtues from the classic authors like Cicero and Pythagoras.
Yes.
And other classic authors. He studied those things to learn about virtue.
And other faith streams as well, too.
And other faith streams as well.
Certainly.
So I noticed when I read this list of virtues here, that except for a couple, it all tends to be.
You're
not going to ask.
I'm not going to go there.
Okay. But it, and wait,
Which ones are you talking about?
and it's probably actually arguing that all of them fall into that category. I was thinking like resolution. Well, I don't know whether that quite fits the mold, but it could.
Well, pretty always.
Yeah, it could fit the mold. So anyhow, all these virtues tend to be other-centered.
Okay.
They're about relationships with the wider world, relationship with other people. How do we have good relations?
Moderating our own personal poor behavior, I guess, to be kind, and self-improving so that we are whole enough and virtuous enough that we can relate to others without harming them, hurting them, or pushing down their rights to their life, their freedom, their liberty, and their pursuit of self-improvement, virtue, becoming everything that I talk about it, everything that God created them to be, not using my power to coerce your formation as a person. And I think that's a wonderful pursuit, right? I mean, and it is very consistent with what Jesus and the church and the disciples at least saying, or should be saying.
I think that it would be reasonable to assert that the pursuit of these things is critical to the survival of the species.
Okay.
We as a species may not survive if we don't pursue these things, because we found ourselves in a place now where the very powerful can do some extremely destructive things.
Sure. Which is nothing new, really, at the end of the day.
Well, it's a little worse now than it might have been 100 years ago.
Well, I don't know. Genghis Khan, pretty.
And he didn't have nuclear weapons, and he didn't have climate change.
Well,
They're a little more extensive.
He had a lot of swords and a lot of people building it.
That's true. We will delve into that. So what intrigued me about this notion of the pursuit of happiness is it's really what we are all about. And I would argue it's what Jesus was about.
Okay.
Jesus was about the pursuit of happiness, teaching us how to pursue a good life.
Yeah. Being good.
Yeah.
And living well with our neighbors and our enemies. Right.
And our enemies.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was very interesting was one of the things that Benjamin Franklin was pursuing was never to be contentious with anyone, and which made him, according to what Rosen and others are saying, incredibly good statesman, because he was able to have conversations, not be contentious, made him an incredible diplomat that was able to do wonderful things within his statesmanship, which for me, I tend to sort of like being contentious a little bit and poking the bear, so to speak, in conversations and whatnot. But that was for me. I was like, that's an incredible virtue. Always to listen to people and to allow people to have voice and those kinds of things. But then not being contentious, but also presenting an alternate position or viewpoint, and then trying to come at some sort of middle ground that works for everyone, which of course is the goal of democracy. And again, I don't know about you, but I certainly am not a politician and have not studied government or things like this. Listen to the podcast, learned a few things, and now we're just chatting about it. But I do think that this whole idea of the pursuit of virtues is really at the core of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And of course, one of the things I always like to say is that the New Testament is our Constitution, is our Declaration of Independence as people of faith, at least in a Christian stream. One of the things that I really enjoyed, or was part of my early discipleship, was what is mentioned in 2 Peter. It's in chapter 4, I believe. No, chapter 1. And it is verse, where it's in here. Oh, yeah, verse 5. So 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 5 through 9. So it says, "For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But whoever does not have them is nearsighted and blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from their past sins."
Great list of virtues.
Great list of virtues.
Yeah.
And I think that in biblical terms, we could say that Peter understood that the pursuit of happiness in life was to add these things in increasing measure, right, into one's journey in life with others, and that in so doing, we are fulfilling the law of Christ. And if we don't do it, we're sunk.
Indeed.
And that is, it seems to me that, interestingly, it'd be great if they put that in the Declaration of Independence or something, right? But they summarize.
They kind of did.
They kind of did. Although I wish they hadn't just assumed that everybody understood the pursuit of happiness, because I think that it is very easy to say, and I thought about this. One of the arguments would be, well, whether or not they meant that then, that's what that meant then. What really matters is what it means to me now. Well, I have a right to pursue my happiness the way I would to pursue my happiness, and how I define happiness, not how they define happiness.
That's probably why it's important to understand history
And context, yeah.
and context. One, the way they understood happiness, as I said, is other-centered. It's not a self-centered thing. If I insist on defining happiness as a self-centered thing, then it defeats the purpose of what they were about.
Yes.
At that time. That's the importance of
But it takes a lot of work.
basic
Think about
education. Well,
how much effort it took you and I. I mean, how old are we? 61. How old are you?
huh? How old? 74.
74, way much older than me. I don't know about you, but I have never heard this.
I don't think I had either. But maybe that's the purpose of these kinds of things that we're doing. It helps to educate.
Well, if it's not helping anybody else, it's helping you and I be smart people.
It is. And, well, I'm struck by the thought, well, 1 Corinthians 13, Paul ends, faith, hope, and love. These, Paul says, these are the central things. They're directly related to
These are the core
things.
virtues, the core ways of being.
Yeah, these are the things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, the love, let me hasten to add, that Paul references is God-like love, not love as we often think about it. One wants to be careful with that. It's like happiness. How do we define happiness?
Right.
Is it self-centered or is it other-centered? Now, when Paul was talking, obviously he's talking about love, godly love.
Yeah, agape love.
In fact, you folks out there listening, I suggest to you that you go and read Corinthians 13, and everywhere love appears, substitute God. It's a very legitimate exercise. God is patient and kind. God is, etc.
So going off of God is love.
Going off of the notion that God is love. It gives one, I think, a very true New Testament perspective.
But love is not necessarily God.
Of who God is. Well, we're talking about, that's because we're talking about a particular kind of love.
That might be another good podcast for that.
It would probably be
if God is love God, or what? Yeah. Well, we could argue a lot about that.
Well, we'll proceed. We got to do one on freedom, too.
Freedom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Got to do one on freedom.
Yeah. We just can't wax too political because I just, yeah.
Oh, no, it's not about politics at all.
Okay.
Freedom is not, well, y'all are going to quite, everything is political. Everything is political. It really is.
That's like reading now. We've got the next three topics.
Anybody who thinks Jesus wasn't political really needs to go read it again.
Well, can't argue with that. Touch the polis.
Yeah.
The Roman polis and the Jewish polis all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyhow, we digress.
Yes. If we need to go to questions too.
All right. Yeah.
Any last things you want to say?
Yeah. One other list that I remember is, let me find it, is in Galatians 5:22. The list of the fruits of the Spirit. Listen to this one. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. You can see a lot of corollaries between that list and Franklin's list.
Yes.
A lot of corollaries.
And we talked a little bit about that as we were preparing this. And, I proposed or, asked a question. I've always looked at the fruits of the Spirit as something that, as we are branches tied into the vine, that sort of the sap of the Spirit, right? And the presence of God and Jesus in our lives, that the fruits just naturally grow. They sort of just happen. But I think this conversation, I think we can talk about that too, is do these things naturally happen as we dwell in Christ and we journey with other virtuous, ethical, faithful people? Will they just sort of naturally come about? How much work is involved in all of that? How much effort do we talked about Franklin, how, by the end of his life, he was like, oh my gosh, this is an awful lot of work. I'm like got 1 out of the 13 going. So yeah, the effort that's involved, and I think that's, in listening to the podcast, that's why they use the word pursuit, in the sense that this is a lifelong journey, and that any sort of coercion or oppression that inhibits someone from this lifelong journey of becoming everything God created them to be needs to be addressed. We have a right to become everything that God created us to be and not be oppressed in that pursuit or coerced in that pursuit. But it mandates effort on our part. We have to pursue it. It's not going to necessarily pursue us, which of course then adds another whole podcast on who's pursuing who.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so we're going to stop right there.
Do we have to?
We do. We
Well,
have to stop because we have to have content for the next one of these.
There are a few other things to be said about this issue yet.
Maybe people will comment and maybe people will create conversation online, which they haven't quite done yet, but we have Grace in here.
Well, just one quickie. Just one real quickie.
All right.
On this issue.
All right.
In Philippians 4:11, Paul says that I have learned to be content in any situation I find myself. He says,
Yes.
I have learned the secret to contentment.
Uh-huh.
Relative to the issue of pursuit, Paul, it sounds like, had more or less arrived. He was no longer pursuing because he had learned the secret of being content. The secret of being content, obviously, is to embody the mind of Christ. That's the end goal, because when we've reached that goal, then the pursuit of happiness may actually have culminated.
I would agree that at the time that he wrote that, he probably thought he might have already arrived.
Well, okay.
But the question is,
I
I think I thought I had arrived many times, only to very quickly learn I ain't there yet, right?
Well, that is true. I think that I know we got to stop here. See, this is what I do.
I'm trying to
stop.
do.
It's obvious.
It's why our lunches lasted.
It's obviously a combination of the two. It's pursuit, which allows for practice, which allows for developing spiritual muscle, which may indeed get us to the end goal.
Yes, I would say that he hit the nail on the head of what he was supposed to be pursuing. Whether he had arrived at that full place, who knows? I didn't know, Paul.
It helps me to believe that it is possible to arrive.
Okay.
I mean, why not? Why not believe it's possible to arrive? Jesus, I would suggest, arrived. Jesus lived that very life where Jesus had arrived at this full relationship with God. That's the goal, is to arrive at that place. And Jesus did it. And I'm not sure that we can. In fact, Jesus seemed to indicate that we can. He said, you will do more than I've done. We haven't succeeded in that yet. But see, the possible goal sits there waiting.
And I'm fine if you want you saying that, and that's great. I think that's a whole nother conversation and podcast, because there's a lot of nuances there that a lot of things I want to say, but I'm not going to say it because I'm going to let you have the last word.
Well, that is the last word.
My word is that that was your last word, John.
That was it. One of the questions was you were supposed to do 4 minutes ago.
I know. And I those of you that are listening, I keep saying, directing things and talking to Grayson. Grayson, I don't know whether I could introduce you, or maybe you want to come and introduce yourself, who you are. Grayson is, well, we're soliciting, trying to woo Grayson into the idea of being our first and most illustrious podcast producer ever. And so I don't know, Grayson, do you want to come up and say hi to folks and introduce yourself? And then I don't know whether you'll have any questions or not for Millard and I.
Yeah. Hello, Harry. So yeah, I'm Grayson. I am here today, I guess, for my first day in person, sort of trying to see what y'all are all about. And I've been enjoying the podcast so far. I've been listening to some of your previous episodes, and then it's been a pleasure being here to listen to you and Millard talking.
I see you've been
about
taking
happiness.
notes there.
I have been, yes.
All right.
Some things that I want to look into further, questioning on my own, but then also some that I want to ask both of you.
Okay.
And so actually one of my first questions that came up while you were talking was regarding, well, being good, because you were talking about the pursuit of happiness as the pursuit of sort of goodness within yourself. And so if we are being good and living well with our neighbors and enemies, which was something that you specifically said earlier on, Harry, who are our enemies if we are being, I guess, sort of living that good life and living well, again, with everyone?
Yes. If we're for that virtuous, how might we have enemies? So I'm going to have to fact check myself. I want to say that it was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who may have said this, but so we'll need to fact check this. But someone said it, I know for sure. And I think it was Bonhoeffer, so we'll figure that out in a little bit. But the statement was that Jesus never imagined that we as disciples would ever have someone that we consider to be our enemy. But instead, because of who we are and how we are living, that there would be many who would consider us their enemies. And that our response to them approaching us as their enemy, we are to respond to them with love, goodness, turning the other cheek. So Bonhoeffer, I believe, reframed that and said, Jesus and we as disciples, you're right. We should never consider anyone, if we're fully embracing the identity of God's love and pursuing love in the world, we don't have enemies that we make. But there are people who consider us to be their enemies. And what is our response to them? Well, we don't retaliate. And we don't turn towards them as aggressors, and we don't try to kill them and to get them out of our lives because they consider us to be their enemies. We try to win over those who consider us to be their enemies with love. And that's how I see it. I don't know, Millard, do you have any thoughts on that?
But I think that's an excellent description of how we would consider enemies. I don't have any. Other people probably may consider me one.
Yeah.
Again, it's contingent upon me to react
Yeah.
in a Christ-like way.
And there might be people that we dislike. I mean, I think there's always going to be people we dislike. The question is, what do we do with that? How do we approach those people that we don't dislike? And the idea is that we approach them in a loving, caring way. Then I think kind of goes back to the conversation that we were having earlier, where we grant them the rights, the inalienable right to their life, to their liberty, and their pursuit of self-improvement and becoming everything God created them to be. And we do not inhibit that because we don't like them or we don't like the way they're doing that necessarily. Unless, then there's all the nuances. They're being harmed to other people.
Okay, next.
Well, yeah. So something else that I've been kind of curious about is we're talking about this script from, our history as a country, which is not, we're a country that has freedom of religion. And so there's this beautiful aspect of our culture where we have a lot of different people with a lot of different faith backgrounds and some who don't have faith.
Yeah.
In any way.
Atheists, agnostics.
And so with that, that what you were just talking about with us not making our own enemies, but some people, I guess, may choose us as their enemies. And so we are really accepting or trying to be accepting of everyone as we can be. I guess, how do you see this sort of idea being a founding core of our country? How do you see that as sort of connecting with the faith aspect of us as Christians, really using that as part of our faith as well?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Are you making a tie-in between the founding fathers' Constitution, etc., with religion in general?
Yes. So I guess the discussion this morning is regarding the pursuit of happiness and what we sort of, what was originally intended by that as from the founding fathers' perspective. And so how is that not only something that Christians pursue, but also that everyone within this would be a church person?
I think that when the founding fathers wrote about freedom of religion, your obvious point was that there would be no religion dictated by the state. I don't think they had in mind particularly freedom from religion. I think they sort of expected that people would be religious in whatever way they chose to be religious. So people's belief structures are to be their own business. It's not the business of the state. But with the notion of pursuit of the virtues, one has to, I think, come to the conclusion that their hope was that people would seek goodness in whatever form that they fall into, whether it was through Buddhism or Islam, whatever it was, that the pursuit of goodness would be at the center of their self-improvement. Harry?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, more the question I think I'm hearing is, so as Christians in a faith-based setting where many Christians believe, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through Christ. Kind of got that scripture that we all lean towards. The brethren, the Church of the Brethren, have long had this motto, no coercion in religion. And have long said, well, we believe that the way that Jesus lived is the best way for humans to live, which are all these, virtues that we're talking about. And we are going to live in that way, and we are not going to force anyone to believe that or to even live that way necessarily. We're just going to live that way. And then we are going to let, if it's true, then we're going to let that truth do what that truth does in the world and sort of leave to God kind of thing. And I like that. I was a missionary as an evangelist for many years, have told people forever, really, believe in Jesus, accept Jesus as Lord and Savior. And I still believe that. I just sort of believe that in a little bit different way as I've aged and as I've grown. So I think it's almost scary for me these days to call myself a Christian because there's so much negative baggage on what that means in so many sectors of the world, not just in America, but just globally, right? So I really prefer to say I am a follower of the way of Jesus, which is actually originally what the New Testament church said. They were followers of the way. And so that's how I look at it. I have found that the way that Jesus lived and died is a good way to both live and die. And I'm going to pursue that. And I'm going to share my story and allow that story to be a story perhaps that others find themselves in as well. And if they don't, I'm a pan-theologian. You know what a pan-theologian is?
Could you define?
Yes, it's all going to pan out in the end. I figure there's so much I don't know. There's so much other people don't know. We think these things, and there's all this wisdom literature that we're looking to, and we're trying to improve ourselves, improve the way we relate, and improve our world. But at the end of the day, I'm old enough to know that the things I knew for absolute sure so many years ago were just wrong. Yeah. And the things that I know enough to know that the things I'm super committed to right now, some of them might be wrong. Maybe a lot of them might be wrong. And so my goal is to love like Jesus loved, live like Jesus lived, die like Jesus died, and then leave the rest to God, because there's probably a whole lot more, I think, that the divine knows than we is. So that's how I approach.
Well, I really appreciate that openness that you're sharing, because that's also another part of the Church of the Brethren, right? Is that we're all on our own journey, sort of pursuing this. And so I really appreciate that also what you were saying, Millard, about that pursuit of goodness that anyone can pursue in a lot of different ways. And how we're pursuing it here.
Exactly.
Church of the Brethren. Yeah. That's really good.
Well, thank you. Well, we'll let that be the last word. Grayson. So thank you all for listening. We are getting ready to head to church. So we will hopefully we'll see you. You're all welcome to come and meet with us here upstairs at Pleasant Valley Church of the Brethren in the upper room. We used to call it the green room because it was green. We'll call it maybe the upper room now, or podcast room. I don't know. But if you want to come and listen in and join in and ask questions at 9:30 most every Sunday, you're welcome to do that. Feel free to comment in the comments section, ask any questions. We'll try to answer those. Thank you for listening. All the best to you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.